mocked and derided and considered to be nutcases and the wild men from the hills.
This is LBC, leading Britain's conversation.
If you ever thought, I want to tell that Farage bloke what I really think about him, well, here's your chance, take it.
This is Phone Farage. UKIP leader Nigel Farage takes your calls with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. This is Phone Farage with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Only on LBC.
It's 9 o'clock on Friday the 12th of September, and that means it's time for your very first official edition of Phone Farage with me, Nigel Farage, here on LBC. I'll be taking your questions for the next half an hour or so, and if you want to get involved, here is how to do it. Call me on 0345 6060 973 or email to nigel@lbc.co.uk. Don't forget, you can also watch Phone Farage on our website, lbc.co.uk. So, straight to the first call. And it's Chris in Holborn. Good morning, Chris.
Morning, Nigel.
What would you like to say?
Oh, well, sorry, I was just questioning where I was on there. Right,
Oh, you are, mate, yeah.
Yeah, all right, brilliant. Well, first of all, welcome to the real world. Welcome to, I think, London's vision of a new all-inclusive democracy. I believe LBC plays a big part in bringing...
It's the nations now. It's Nick Ferrari here. It's the nations now. So your question to the leader of UKIP, and great to have you on board, Chris, and well done for posting the first ever question. Let's get straight to it, Chris.
Thank you very much. Right, OK. Well, Nigel, look, big plans ahead with the potential, and I hope so, Scotland be brave, independence of Scotland. Where do you see England in 10 years' time, economically, socially, healthcare? Let's talk about all the big things, all the things you're hoping for, all the things you stand for, and all the things you want to change.
Well, the only problem, Chris, is LBC have only given me half an hour, but let's have a crack. Right, first things first, Scotland the brave and the independence referendum. Mr. Salmon says it's an independence referendum, and the grey men from Westminster who make up the Better Together campaign also call it an independence referendum. It is no such thing. This referendum is about Scotland separating itself away from England and signing up to becoming part of the new emerging European state. And it's a treaty that Mr. Salmon will be forced to sign that will commit Scotland to being part of the Schengen area, so complete uncontrolled immigration into its borders. But crucially, it's a treaty that Mr. Salmon will sign up to, committing Scotland to joining the euro. Now, we could debate, Chris, whether being in the EU is good for Scotland or bad for Scotland. I have my view. But one thing for certain is if people think they're voting yes next Thursday because they're voting for Salmon's vision of an independent, proud Scotland the brave, they are being very badly misled. And I feel that this whole referendum is taking place on an entirely false premise, and that's why I'm going up to Glasgow after this Phone Farage show this morning, and I'm hoping that this time I won't be locked in a pub for my own safety, as happened the last time I was there in Edinburgh. Well, if it happens, I suppose. So that...
Could be a worse place to be locked.
Well, the locals thought it was terrific, most exciting day for years. So that deals with that. So I actually think, Chris, that it will be a no next week. I know that Salmon is a far better campaigner than the grey men from Westminster, and certainly out on the stump and in the street, he's cut an attractive figure. But I feel just in the last few days, the fact that he doesn't have an alternative economic plan, he hasn't got a central bank, the fact that the big banks will have to leave next Friday, their headquarters will have to leave next Friday, so I suspect that it will be a no. So we're going to be a United Kingdom, and as a United Kingdom, we will have a referendum, I very much hope, within the next 2 to 3 years, on whether we stay part of the European Union or not, and that will be the single most important historic decision, Chris, that you and I will have to take in our lifetimes. And if we get that right, I see a free, prosperous, independent United Kingdom.
Quick response from you, Chris.
OK, I have to say a little disappointed, because I viewed the potential independence of Scotland as a catalyst. And bear in mind, obviously, independence is in the title. Although UK may have to be rethought, Nigel. You might have to rename your party, because it's going to be a disunited kingdom, isn't it?
Well, if it's a yes vote, if it's a yes vote...
What will you call UKIP, Mr Farage?
Yeah, well, we will cross that bridge when we come to it, I think is the answer to that. But Chris, the point I'm making is it's not really an independence referendum at all, and that's really the point that I was keen to get across to you.
And the point you wrote in the Daily Telegraph yesterday, Nigel Farage, and you made that point. What should then the political masters of Whitehall have done concerning this vote?
Well, the first thing they should have done is to make sure that they, wanting to maintain the United Kingdom, kept the power of the status quo. They should have had the yes side. So the question should have been, do you want Scotland to remain in the United Kingdom? So Cameron and Darling and all the other grey men could have said, vote yes. We've got the positive side of the argument. They handed that to Salmond. Just an extraordinary error of judgment. And the second thing that Cameron got hugely wrong, and certainly if it's a yes next week, he will have got hugely wrong, and I doubt he'll be able to stay on as Prime Minister, is he didn't give them the option of Devo Max, of further devolved powers. Had that been on the ballot paper, I am in no doubt that it would have got 50% plus of the vote.
So Scotland goes yes, Cameron would have to go. Would Ed Miliband have to go as well?
I don't... Funny enough, he's actually got the most to lose from this referendum, with over 40 Labour MPs sitting in Westminster. I don't think Miliband would be forced to go, but he would look absolutely inept, and he's just not connecting with his own people.
Any admiration for Alex Salmond?
Oh, listen, in terms of, going out and street campaigning and meeting people and putting across, until yesterday when he started to get angry, but putting across this optimistic message. He's a tremendous campaigner. He's head and shoulders above everybody else in Scotland and has been for a long time. And that's why the SNP are doing so well. Where he falls down is when it comes to economics. And that, I think, is what's turning the tide.
We must move to other callers.
Yes,
that's what Phone Farage is about. Who's next, Nigel?
John in Claygate. Good morning.
Yes, hello, Nigel. The Queen said this week or last week that she wants nothing to do with this this question of Scotland and its referendum, and she's not going to get involved. She flunked the whole business and ducked her constitutional duty at the time of the Maastricht Treaty, and she's doing it now again. Does she not have a legal and constitutional right to get involved in the breakup of the United Kingdom and protect the country?
Well, constitutional debates are always very difficult because you'll find one expert that says yes and one that says no. My understanding of the Constitution is that if the kingdom itself, if the United Kingdom itself is under threat, then in many ways you could argue she has a responsibility to say something. I completely understand her wanting to keep out of politics, and she's done it absolutely brilliantly over 60 years. I mean, she is a globally admired figure. I doubt the royal family has ever been more popular over centuries than it currently is. But there are times when, if the United Kingdom, over which she is the monarch, is threatened itself, when it might be right to say something. That doesn't mean that she has to. But if we got to, let's say we got to this Sunday, and let's say it was still 50-50 in the polls, I personally think she should say something, yes.
Oh, you do?
I do. I think if the very future of the United Kingdom itself is threatened, she should say something, and there is a precedent for this. She did it in 1977. She did it in Westminster Hall when she spoke her Silver Jubilee speech, and when the first calls for separation, or the first modern calls for separation, were being heard, and she said very clearly that I am the Queen of the entire United Kingdom. So she said it before, and it might be handy if she said it again.
John, thank you. We move on.
Okay.
Mr. Farage.
Yes, the next caller is Max in Rochdale.
Hi, Nigel.
Max, good morning.
Firstly, I'd just like to say thank you for re-engaging this cynical teenager in politics.
Well, that's a good start, yeah.
How old are you, may I ask, Max? You don't have to answer.
19.
Thank you, sir. On you go.
If we left the EU, would UKIP commit to supporting gay marriage?
Yeah, look, this whole question of gay marriage, what I've said about it is, firstly, it wasn't in the manifesto. Secondly, it was an argument and a fight that wasn't, I don't think, particularly needed. Even Stonewall weren't campaigning for gay marriage. And thirdly, my big concern is I do think when we talk about minority groups and their rights, we have to respect all minority groups and their rights. And my big fear is all the while we're under the European Court of Human Rights, we face a very real risk that as registry offices conduct gay marriages, but churches, and don't forget we have an established church in England, don't, that I think there is a clear argument in Strasbourg that there is state discrimination. And I think if the churches and the faith communities were forced to conduct gay marriages against their will, that would be wrong. So that has been my huge concern, Max, over this. Once we're free of the European Union, and we're free of the European Court of Human Rights, and we have our own laws and our own Supreme Court, that worry would disappear.
Let's get a response. Max, do you want to have a quick comeback with Mr Farage?
That pretty much
okay,
answers
well done.
Very good.
Nigel, you're batting him out of the park at the moment.
Right.
We move on.
Well, yeah, it mustn't get complacent.
No, indeed.
No. Well, OK, Tanya in Harlow, good morning. You're the next caller.
Hello, Mr. Farage and
Hello.
Nikki.
Hello.
Hello, Miss. Hello.
On
Sorry,
your
I'm a bit tired. Just done a 13-hour night shift.
Right, you are...
I'm a nurse on
nurse.
a ward.
OK, yep.
Bless what you do.
Right, what I'd like to ask you, Mr. Farage, is in light of all the terrorist atrocities that are going on in this world and all the preach-hating on our streets in England, are you going to tighten our borders and are you going to impose new laws on these people that keep preaching hate on our streets? Because the British citizens of this country are fed up with it.
OK, first things first, borders. We don't have any borders anymore. They've gone. They've been surrendered. We're members of this wonderful European club, and that means that the British passport, and if you look at your British passport, the first thing it says now is European Union. That passport is held effectively by nearly 500 million people, and any of them can come here, regardless whether they're good people or not. So, yes, I want us to have proper border controls. I want us to have a positive immigration policy, rather like Australia, where we say we want good people, we want people with skills, but we don't want people who've got criminal records, we don't want people who've got life-threatening diseases, we want people who can speak the language, and we want people who want to become part of our society. So there is actually a very positive message to put out there about controlled immigration. Your second point, do we need new laws to stop hate preachers or whatever else it may be? No. We don't need any more laws. We've got loads of laws. The police have got plenty of powers, as have the courts. What we need is for our institutions in this country, and I'm including the police force in this, to be somewhat more robust in making sure that everybody is treated equally. Because if you look at what has happened in Rotherham and Rochdale, and who's to say there won't be more northern towns and cities where we hear the same story. What we see is effectively a misapplication of the law in the name of political correctness for fear of causing offence.
But when you say you want other sort of Rotherham-style scandals, just to make absolutely plain what you're saying.
I am saying that we have seen Rotherham, we have seen Rochdale. I would not be in the least...
Predominantly Pakistani males grooming young, predominantly white girls for sex trafficking.
I'm afraid that's what the facts say. And what is becoming clear is that local members of Parliament chose to turn a blind eye. I mean, Dennis McShane has virtually admitted it, and
well, he did. He said he was too liberal. With reflection,
yes,
he was too liberal and too socialist.
Yes, he did.
That,
but there are other names appearing in today's newspapers of MPs in that area who are beginning to admit they had complaints, they did nothing, and you've seen some of these youngsters and their parents who went directly to social services, went directly to the police, and nothing was done. But it gets back...
Why is that immigration, Mr Farage?
Well, what it's about is uncontrolled immigration, leading to a very large number of newcomers coming into a country at a pace and at a speed where it is very difficult to assimilate and integrate within the community, allied to, of course, what we've had for 4 decades, which is state-sponsored multiculturalism. Now, that word, people get very confused over. I'm not opposed to multiculturalism in the sense I'm not opposed to people being here from all over the world and brightening the place up and making the food better and all of those things. What I'm opposed to is a state that seeks to maintain those divisions rather than a state that tries to bring us all together as one, with a common feeling of who we are and where we're going.
But in some instances, those perpetrators were British-born, of course. Although of Pakistani origin, they are British-born.
Absolutely. And just as some of the ISIL fighters that are over in Iraq and Syria at the moment, are British-born and holding British passports. So, there are some very real problems in these communities. I have to say, I thought it was a very bold and a brave and a good thing that Amjad Bashir, who's a Pakistan-born Muslim, who's now a UKIP MEP, spoke out about this and said, look, we in the Pakistani community have to admit there's a problem, and the only way you can deal with the problem is first to admit that it exists. So back to the question.
Yep.
We don't need more laws, but we do need to enforce equally across everybody in this country the laws that we have.
Tanya, response from you?
Well, I can say that. I mean, I work on a multicultural ward with all different nurses from different backgrounds, and they are all very worried about our country. Our country is a Christian country, and if people want to live here, they abide by our rules and our laws. We wouldn't go to another country and do the things that people get away with in this country. It is wrong. We pay for these people that preach hate on our streets, and we pay for them to stay in these houses. And this Omar Chowdhury, who, defends these killers of Lee Wrigley, it is disgusting, absolutely disgusting.
Well, just for I think you mean Anjem Chowdhury, and he says he doesn't necessarily defend them, he has sympathy with their cause, just to get that right. Final response on this from you, Nigel Farage?
I think, actually, that what Tanya is saying, and it's very heartfelt, is a view that had she expressed on LBC 5 or 7 years ago, the fader may have been brought into play, and it would have been decided that Tanya was a little bit too rich for the blood of LBC listeners, and I would suggest that what Tanya is now saying is absolutely at the centre ground of how most people in this country are feeling.
Before we move on to another call, you say you welcome people to this country as long as they don't have life-threatening illnesses, to quote some of your words back. How would you determine whether they did or they didn't, Mr. Farage?
Well, Nick, if you chose to emigrate to Australia, well, actually, they wouldn't have you. Too old now.
Thank you. But I thought you were going to try and get on well. Old and ugly, you could have said.
No, I'm too old as well, don't worry. But, no, if you want to go into Australia, you're given an AIDS test, you're given a TB test. I mean, this isn't difficult.
And that should be everybody, regardless of whether you're in Europe, European, whether you're...
Well, I actually want us to have an immigration policy that is non-discriminatory, because at the moment we discriminate in favour of people from Poland or Romania or Bulgaria, regardless who they are, and we discriminate against people from New Zealand,
the supposed Commonwealth,
or from India, or Canada, or whatever else it may be. We've got I think our priorities completely wrong here, and we should not be discriminating on grounds of nationality. Absolutely, and that to me would make sense.
Move on, shall we?
Yes, John in Bournemouth. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Farage. I was wondering, you like creating sort of political firsts, I gather. I wonder if you'd like to do something quite sensible when you bring out this manifesto, which I hope is a lot more succinct. I wondered if you would consider seriously, because I don't think you will be forming the next government on your own, is indicate in that manifesto what policies that you would be willing that you wouldn't drop if you went in coalition. And would that mean that you'd have to have a different list if it was Labour to if it was Conservative? I think you could create a wonderful first that way, and then if we know there's a hung parliament and you're in negotiations, we'll actually know what you're negotiating for, which is quite different to what we know when Cameron tries to renegotiate Europe.
Yeah, John, these are known as red lines in politics, and the difficulty with red lines, of course, is that previous prime ministers have declared them and broken them so many times that the public don't have much faith. I will commit at this stage to one thing, and that is that if UKIP finds itself in a position next May where it holds the balance of power or it has serious influence in Westminster, the one absolute that under no circumstances will we surrender for anything is we want this country to have a full, free and fair referendum campaign. And I say that because I've seen the way EU referendums have been conducted in Ireland and Malta and elsewhere, with a wall of money on one side against the other, with the media, frankly, not giving both sides the same argument. So that, John, is the absolute red line. As to what else it would be, well, there are other issues. There are priorities like HS2, which I think we'd find impossible to support under any circumstances. But I think the answer, John, really is we may have a fuller shopping list come next May.
OK. And when would you want that referendum, before we move on, Nigel Farage?
Well, I don't think we should waste, another couple of years entering into a renegotiation that is not on offer. It's perfectly obvious. If you listen to everybody, Mr. Juncker, the new boss of the European Commission, they'll give a few little cosmetic concessions. But on the things that Britain wants, they're not up for negotiation. One is the supremacy of law. Britons do feel that our Parliament and our Supreme Court should be in charge. That's not up for negotiation. The other is the completely free movement of people across borders, and again, that's not up for debate. So I wouldn't waste too long. I would get on with it after the next general election.
Let me bring in an email. We're getting a number of those as well, if I may. This is from D. What are your views on what's called the bedroom tax, Nigel Farage?
I think it was very badly brought in. I think it's led to a strong feeling that actually life's becoming pretty unfair and the state's rather beastly and rather bullying. And yes, of course, Ian Duncan Smith is right. We do need to get the welfare budget down, but I don't think this was the right thing to do. And UKIP didn't support it and doesn't support it.
Lewis Stowell in Cumbria. Since your party emerged victorious in the European elections, what have you actually done within the EU? Asks Mr. Stowell.
We've made our presence felt, I can absolutely assure you. In fact, a German MEP said to me in the coffee bar, the members' coffee bar in Strasbourg in July, he said, "You're turning this place into the House of Commons." I said, "I know, it's good, isn't it?" So we're intervening, we're speaking, we're raising points of order, we're getting on dealing with constituents' queries and questions, and I was in Brussels this week with the team, and we're very united in terms of what we want to do, but I'm not going to delude you that somehow, because we have 24 UKIP MEPs, that we're going to make the whole European ship change direction. We're not.
Not yet. I interrupt just briefly to tell you news from Pretoria. We have a verdict now in the Oscar Pistorius trial. He has been found guilty of culpable homicide just within the last minute breaking. We'll have full reaction on that in just about 10 minutes' time. Breaking news here on LBC. Oscar Pistorius verdict, guilty of culpable homicide. We wait on, of course, verdicts on other charges and indeed sentencing. Back to phone Farage. Where do we go, Nigel?
Yes, OK, we go to Tracy in Dagenham.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
Nigel, my question to you is, if you come into power, will you make sure that all the halal meat is clearly labelled and not forced on us and our children? As the lady before said, this is a Christian country and it's actually in the Bible. Personally, I prefer a whole ban on halal meat, but if it isn't going to happen, can it at least be stunned,
Yeah, I know this is a very, very contentious issue. Halal meat, you've also got Jewish production of meat, and there are an awful lot of arguments that rage back and forth. The one thing I would say, Tracy, is that the biggest decline in animal welfare in terms of slaughter is the fact that we've closed over 300 of our slaughterhouses in this country. We did it under insane EU rules that meant you had to have a vet present whilst you were slaughtering animals, which meant all the small ones closed. And now, millions of animals every year that are slaughtered have long journey times. And you see those on the motorways, don't you? You see the sheep and whatever being moved on the motorways, which perhaps 20 years ago you didn't see. Food labelling is something which the British government now has almost nothing to do with. Food labelling is controlled by the European Union. And you'll see, perhaps a packet of meat in a supermarket with a tractor on it, a British tractor on it, farm assured. Doesn't mean a damn thing. It's probably actually been reared somewhere within the European Union. So I think you're right. I think consumers deserve good, fair food labelling. But I would not go along with trying to ban Jewish or Muslim methods.
There is a place then, as long as everything is labelled either kosher or halal or...
And I think that's the problem, is that we just don't know what we're buying at the moment.
OK, all right. We move on to other callers.
Yes, thank you. OK, Mike in Cheshunt. Good morning, Mike.
Morning, Mr Farage. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
If after the general election you can form a coalition government with either the Conservatives or Labour, will you cancel the £50 billion HS2 project?
Did you say 50 or 60?
Well, who knows?
Oh, come on, it'll be 70. Any advance on 70? 75, right. 80? Who knows what it'll cost? Up to 80 billion sterling for a railway line that during peak times will help 6% of the commuters in this country. It'll reduce the journey time to Birmingham by about 15 minutes, when it still takes 5 hours and 11 minutes to get to Penzance, which is slower than it was in 1914. I think, Mike, you may be getting my tone here. I think this is the most astonishing white elephant. I am totally and utterly and wholly opposed to HS2. That does not mean...
George Osborne would say it opens up the north, Mr Farage.
Well, very interesting. This happened in France. So Marseille to Paris was 6 hours, OK? So they built the TGV and remember, France is a bigger country anyway, but they built the TGV, and Marseille to Paris is now 3 hours. Do you know what it's meant? It's meant lots of companies in Marseille relocating their headquarters to Paris, and a lot more business flowing in the opposite direction. And if you bring Manchester that much closer to London, I suspect it's London that benefits and not Manchester. I don't buy any of the arguments, but, Mike, let me say, I do think there's a strong argument in upgrading some of our railway lines like the one to Penzance, and I think the fact that coming into Paddington and Waterloo every day, and I've no doubt there'll be more calls saying my station's pretty rotten too, but those two are over capacity. Frankly, people are coming in to work in this city in what are third world conditions, and I think it's absolutely appalling we can spend a fraction of the HS2 money to benefit the lives of absolutely millions.
Did you hear what you want?
Refreshing to hear a politician who lives in the real world. Thank you very much.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Let me do a couple of emails, Mr. Farage. John, many of your listeners will be driving Goodwood for the classic car races. Can you give a thank you to Nigel Farage and UKIP and the Daily Mail in the campaign to stop the EU plans to ban classic cars from the roads? And could I please get an update from Nigel, asks John. What? Sorry, you're going to have to fill me in briefly, Nigel.
Yeah,
they wanted to ban our classic cars.
Yeah, it's all to do with emissions.
Of course. Yeah.
They want to ban classic cars. They also have launched effectively a war on the motorcyclist. The EU doesn't like motorcycles because motorcycles are dangerous. I think motorcyclists are bright enough, actually, to have worked out that if they have an accident, they're in a fairly vulnerable position. So, yeah, for the moment, this legislation that would effectively ban cars more than 50 years old from being allowed to be driven at all has stalled, but don't think it's gone away. There is nothing that Brussels does not want to control, and if it's something that human beings enjoy doing, then that gives them an even bigger incentive to try and stop it and ban it.
So you've got the handbrake on at the moment. We're not fully disengaged.
That's right.
All right. One last email before we come back to calls. This is Dave in Northumberland. I read that you recently had lunch in New York with Rupert Murdoch. What did you talk about? What did you eat? And did you have wine or beer?
Dave, I, of course, I'm going to tell you everything that Rupert Murdoch and I discussed in New York. I didn't have lunch with him, actually. In fact, I was actually appearing on Fox News to talk about Putin and the Ukraine and this, I think, just astonishingly stupid idea that British and American troops will be engaging in military exercises in the Ukraine next year. I was making the point, whether Putin's a gangster or not, why poke the Russian bear with a stick? And I finished the interview, and I sort of got up to say goodbye, and the interviewer said, I've just had a message, the boss wants to see you, and I think I knew what he meant. So I went up to floor 27, and I sat down, and had a cup of tea, and talked to Rupert Murdoch. We didn't have lunch, had the choice been beer or wine. It's a hell of a difficult one, that, Dave, to answer. I suspect, given that I'm not particularly a fan of Budweiser and things like that, I'd have actually gone for the wine.
OK. And are you going to say what you talked about?
I can't remember.
We move on to other calls. Where are we going?
OK, we're going to Ben in Haringey. Good morning.
Morning, Nigel. The government are gradually privatising the National Health Service. I want to know whether you would continue that process if you had the balance of power.
Ben, thank you. Very, very important and good question. The government aren't just privatising the National Health Service. The Labour government, followed up with the coalition, are privatising, or should I say outsourcing, virtually everything. Even including the collection of our BBC licence fee. We've outsourced things that previously we thought government departments themselves did. In the process, of course, we have made a lot of rich entrepreneurs even richer. I'm struck that we haven't got better value, we haven't got better bang for our buck, we haven't got better delivery. And whilst I do believe that the free market is generally a good thing in society for bringing competition and the right prices, I actually think the bits of our life that government departments, control, actually should be controlled and run properly by government departments and not outsourced. So I am against outsourcing. I think we need a massive rethink about the way we've outsourced the National Health Service and much of what the state used to be competent to do in this country.
We have a final minute. If you can get one more question,
right?
Do we think?
OK, the last one. Ahmed in New Malden. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Farage, thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak to you. Very quickly, a couple of points I agree with you, especially open door policy within EU borders. I'm totally against that as well. Your views on Middle East and especially Ukraine. fine. But
I have
Mr.
to move you
Farage,
to the question if I can.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
question is that other than EU open border policy, which you are against, and I'm also against that, what else you can offer which Labour or Conservative Party cannot offer?
Fine. I haven't got long. Number one, to provide every child in this country the opportunity of selective education, to try and narrow that gap. The 7% that go to private schools are now moving away from the rest of society. The division between rich and poor, the class divide gets bigger. Number two, a sensible energy policy, which means no more of those disgusting wind turbines, which don't work, which cost an absolute fortune and put about 10 to 12% on every consumer's bill in this country, just so that landowners can get a massive cheque for doing nothing. And number three, we will in Doncaster in 2 weeks' time be talking about our tax and spend ideas. And the real idea there is to get the low paid out of tax, to give people real incentives to get off benefits. I think one of the biggest sadnesses in the last 10 years is that whilst London gets richer and richer, and whilst the top 7% have more and more opportunities, living standards for millions of British families have gone down, and government can help to reverse that.
Now, as we close, Nigel, we add your estimable name to the LBC team sheet. One of the other senior politicians who comes in, Nick Clegg, had this to say about your arrival.
Catch up, Charlie, as he's known otherwise. I look forward to hearing him. But I don't know why he's not putting a proper shift in and doing it every week. But maybe you can ask him.
Perhaps he's in Europe. I'll make that your...
Yes.
Is that your question?
That's right. Maybe he's enjoying the lavish expenses that he does as an MEP in Europe.
Catch up, Charlie. Do you have a response?
No, I'm not going to lower myself to get involved with that. No, actually, Nick, you were right. I am an MEP. I lead a group in the European Parliament. I'm leader of UKIP in this country. We've got 2 by-elections we're currently contesting, including, of course, the one in Clacton. I'm off to Scotland in a minute. I'm pretty busy, and I reckon once a fortnight. I think we got it about right.
I think you have, and indeed next time, in a fortnight, we're coming live from your conference at Doncaster.
Absolutely.
That'll be where Phone
look
Farage.
Forward to it.
Thank you for that, Nigel Farage, appearing here on Phone Farage. Coming up on LBC, we'll have full reaction to what you've heard from Nigel Farage and all the details you need about that Oscar Pistorius sentencing. News on LBC is next.
In the last few minutes, Oscar Pistorius has been found guilty of the culpable homicide of his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp. It's similar to the English charge